Thank you for joining the live stream. Our presentation will begin in just a moment.
Thank you. All right, guys, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Planapalooza, which we are really excited about. This is a chance for us as a city to put our best foot forward, talk about what needs to be done for our zoning ordinance. ZOCO is short just for zoning code, and we're here to really just dive in and work on what that means to the city and how we can best update that to make it work for us going forward into the long-term future. We got tonight our consultants, Brian Wright here and Anna from TPUDC and their team. I'll let them introduce themselves, but really the plan is to do a short presentation, and then we've got tables around the back that we will do a hands-on citizen workshop with you all afterwards. Couple just items about the building here. We are in the Chamber's new space. They have not done a grand opening yet for this space, and they've asked if we just refrain from taking photos and videos of the space because they want to do a big grand reveal for that, and that's going to be on July 26th. You see the signs up around on the wall to help remind you. But so if you can just please refrain from doing photos and videos, that way they can be good with their big sponsors. Meta is one of their very big sponsors, and they've asked them to refrain from do that. So anyway, that's the first thing. Bathrooms, if you need it, are just outside this door. You'll see the signs right out there. So if you do need to jump up and run to the restroom, they are available. The chamber has asked us that we not, have people go back behind. There's a little sign saying, please don't go beyond this point. So if you can just not go back there, that'd be great. Other than that, we hope to have a great evening tonight and have a lot of great input from you all. This is part of the reason you're here, is to give us input for this process, help us along, and know what the citizens want. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Brian Wright, and he'll take us forward from there.
All right, thank you. So he said it's a short presentation. I would say maybe more of a medium presentation. It's a lot of slides, but I'm going to go quickly. And also let me know if you can't hear me, because I know we're all thankful for the air conditioning, but it's loud. So that's going to be important. The other thing is, when it comes to the video and photos and all that stuff, this will be posted. The presentation will be posted, so you can look at it, later. So don't feel like if you don't take a picture of a slide, you won't have it. So yeah, so as Brian said, I'm also Brian. I'm Brian Wright, the founder of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. I'm going to lead us through a presentation, then we're going to let you guys jump in and do an exercise, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, we had it before where I was able to do all kinds of stuff with it, but no problem. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. They're super high tech, what they're doing, which is really cool, but sometimes the low tech thing gets in the way of the high tech. So as Brian said, we've got a team of people that are going to be working on the project over the next several days and the next several months as we go through this. Some of them will be here, in this space, and we'll set up at our office. And then others will be working behind the scenes. So you'll get to know them hopefully as we go. So we get to work all over the country. Oh, by the way, for those of you who were at the kickoff presentation a few weeks ago, I'm doing a bit of a refresher here at the beginning because we have new people here. So I'm not going to do the whole presentation again, but so we get to work all over the country. So we see things that people are doing well, things that they're not doing well, and we can bring those to where we're working and learn from other people's mistakes. But we are headquartered in Franklin, so just down the road, which is nice because it means I was able to drive here instead of getting on an airplane. So while we have this national expertise and the local and regional experience, for us, we want to partner with the community because you all are the experts on this place in a way that we never can be. Even though it's not too far from here, we get to we worked in Columbia and Franklin, of course, and we're going to be working in Fairview and all that. But even though these places are somewhat close by, each place has its own unique desires and character and all of that. And so we count on all of you as a valuable part of the team to help inform the direction that we're going in. So I showed this slide last time for those who are new. I always talk about when we're getting on an airplane, we need to know a few things. Where are we trying to go? What time is our flight? What seat are we in, and where's the bathroom? What you never wonder is how to fly the plane, right? And so when you look at this picture, you're not quite sure, are they coming in for a landing, or are they having a problem and the plane's at this strange angle? I look at zoning a little bit the same, right? As we're opening up the zoning ordinance and sort of, hey, what do you think? What do we need to change? What do we need to improve? All of those things. A lot of times people feel like they have to become an expert in zoning, and they may have never even looked at a zoning ordinance before. So I don't want you to feel like that. There may be things that you're interested in. You can dive into those bits and pieces and learn about that. You may want to become an expert on zoning through this process, and that's okay too. I just don't want you to have that anxiety, because it's a lot, zoning is. There you go. We don't want to make you feel like you have to learn how to fly the plane or become a zoning expert. So Zoning 101, for those of you who aren't experts already, you have a comprehensive plan that's relatively new. And so that comprehensive plan is kind of the foundational document that's overarching on things. So you've got long-range policies in there. There's a vision, it has guidance for growth and development, and then it has different actions directed on how to accomplish your goals. There we go. Within your comp plan, these are the goals that are set out. If you've not studied that, talks about planned growth, efficient transportation, economic opportunity, natural beauty, community focus, and defining spaces. And all of those different goals are kind of elaborated on in that. So if you haven't taken a look at that comprehensive plan, it's online. You can take a look and study it as much as you like. And so the way that the comprehensive plan works, that vision, which is relatively new, is set. And so now we're trying to figure out how does the zoning relate to that. There are some things that in a typical comprehensive plan are a bit vague or aren't clearly defined, and so zoning is part of the way that you start to define those different elements as you go. Hey Anna, can we do next slide? We'll do it old school. Now it's going to be a long presentation instead of a medium presentation. So what is zoning, if you don't know? So the zoning is, like I said, an implementation tool of the comprehensive plan, and it groups land into different areas or zones. Typically it's separated by uses. So you have a commercial zoning district and a residential or industrial, and there will be lots of different sort of sub-zones within that. So this is your zoning map. All that confetti of colors over there are all different zones. You have quite a few. And so it has rules about what you can and can't do in each zone. And, but it's not causing things to happen. So as you adjust the zoning ordinance, make changes to it, it's not to say, oh, now this thing is going to happen here. It's just allowing for something to happen or to prohibit something from happening. Next. So what is zoning? So you can see, this is a charming place that people might like to visit. And this zoning can give you this next, or it can give you this. And so far in our work around the country, we've never had anybody say they want some of this. But they had zoning in this place. So how do we make sure that the zoning you get is reflective of what you want to see in the future? Next. Most of the time, in most places around the country, when a development is proposed, you see articles like this, stop sign for development, and people are coming out with signs and in opposition of a project. And many times you don't even know what the project is. You just can pretty well count on that it's not going to be something you like, and that's just the way it is in most places. Next. But this is actually, the statue is of a developer. So this is a guy, Merrick, and you can see in his hands, maybe not, but he has the blueprints for this new community that he created. This is now Coral Gables in Florida. Beautiful, walkable, community people love. And they loved it so much they made a statue of him. Can you imagine, there aren't many developments where they have statues these days, right? So things have changed. We've come a long way. Next. So, when we talk to people around the country, we ask them, what do you want, and especially in the South, people may say something like, oh, I want Mayberry. I love Mayberry. This is great. Andy Griffith and Opie walking down the road and all that. And so I went and looked and said, well, what was Mayberry? And this actually on the side there was the set for Mayberry. So those are all the little buildings and stuff you'd see in different scenes of the show. But what you can start to look at and realize is it really just looks like a little small historic town, just the way things are laid out. And it's those things. Yes, the stories were compelling and the characters were interesting, but the place that they were doing their life in was also part of the interests of that. Next. This is not Mayberry. This is what we see in a lot of new development around the country. I don't even know where this is. It could be anywhere. It could be here. It could be down the road, next town over. The thing about this is there may have, where that second cul-de-sac is, could have been an old homestead with a barn and a silo and all that. And so something has been replaced, or it could have been a forest, right? And so instead it's now this. And while the people who live in each of these homes may love it, they're excited about it, beyond that, is it additive to the character of the community? Are they glad they have this new development and they lost that farm or that forest? And so, is there a way to do something besides the thing that most people, besides the people who live in an individual house, as a community don't get excited about? Next. Here's a commercial version, Anywhere USA I call this. I don't know, besides the palm trees, it could be right out there maybe, Next slide. This is kind of a funny slide. I love it. I know you can't see it with the lighting, but there's a little sign there in the Burger King yard, and it says Beautification Award. And so I wonder, like, how did Burger King edge out McDonald's or Express Oil Change to win this award? What was it? Their pansies and petunias better, and they have better mowing of their lawn. And so if we're giving awards for things like that, maybe we've set the bar a bit too low. Because you're probably not going to put this picture on your city's webpage or in your Chamber of Commerce and come in your postcard, come to Gallatin. Next. So the thing about it is, though, that all of these images that I've been showing, like I said, all have zoning that allowed them or maybe even required them. And so the way that conventional zoning is set up, sort of post-World War II, is that you would have different pods. So there's a shopping pod. Next. An office pod, so maybe office park. Next. A school pod. Next. Residential single-family pod. Next. And then a residential multifamily pod. Next. And then sometimes two pods get pretty close to each other, and so nobody likes that. So now we need buffers, right? And so we have fences and trees and things that keep you from one from the next. But the thing that's funny about it is, I can't use the pointer on here, but one of those houses that's like 30 feet away from one of those commercial spaces now has to get in their car, drive down the cul-de-sac, come down here, get on this arterial road, causing traffic, just to get the thing that they could have just walked to anyway. And what you find is that people will not be deterred. They actually will go and they'll cut a hole in the fence so that they can get through and use common sense, whatever. But on paper, you thought, well, this commercial use is not compatible with this residential use, so we must separate them and buffer them. Next. There used to not be such a thing as a buffer, because all sorts of places of different types of uses were compatible being next to each other. Right? And so this is, you might recognize this as a historic village, a small town, right? And around the town square here, in the park, where all parades would begin and end, you have commercial uses on the ground floor, and maybe the owner of the business lives above, or maybe they rent it out to somebody. And then as you move away from the village square, you have single-family houses, and you have a church there. And then the single-family houses closer in are on smaller lots, closer to the street, and as you move away, you get larger lots farther from the street, and all of the vegetation that you see is actually, they're just trees and plants that were there or were planted or grew up. They weren't buffers, because the buildings and the form of the buildings were all compatible with one another. What happened in those buildings has changed innumerable times over the 200 years that this place has been in existence. You didn't used to care, but now everything's purpose-built, and so the form of them is not compatible, and so we have to separate them because it might detract from someone's property values. Next. We actually go even one step further, and we'll separate single-family residential by income, right? So we'll have different pods. So in this left-hand image over here, there was, let's say those are the $80,000, and at the top left, $80,000 condos, and then those are the $150,000 houses that are smaller, and then these bigger ones here are the $200,000 and $300,000 houses. As it turns out, though, you actually don't need guards and gates to keep people from attacking one another within their little pods, right? They actually work together. They're just at different positions in their company. Or maybe it's somebody's kid who's gotten out of college, has a job, and they're living in a condo above. And so the idea of having to do all of this sort of micro separation wasn't a thing. In the image over here, this is actually a block in one of the most valuable, most high dollar real estate places in the country. This is in Georgetown, where all the congressmen and senators and all sorts of rich people live. And what you see is on one block, you have the condos on this side, you have townhouses attached on one end, then you have single-family houses on the other side. And they all actually shared an alley back in the back, and people could walk around the block and they would see, oh, hey, how's it going? How's little Sally doing in school? Because you're talking to her teacher who lived in the condo, and you came around the block where you lived in the house. So we didn't used to separate like that either. Next. The work environment has always been different than it is now. We didn't have the idea of the office park, and here you can see a theoretical pedestrian in the rendering next to the 18-wheeler going down the road there. That's actually an artist rendering, believe it or not. People used to, have office buildings, and they would walk downstairs and grab a bite to eat, and they didn't have to use their whole lunch hour getting in the car, fighting the traffic, or sit at their desk eating a sandwich. Next. Open space, that's something that we hear a lot about in nearly every community we go to. People say, we want more open space. If they know nothing else, they know to say, we want more open space, right? Great. However, what you tend to get, a lot of zoning ordinances will simply just say, we have to have X% of land left open or undeveloped in any given development. Open space used to be in the forms of parks and plazas and meaningful centers of communities, right? Now it's sort of this leftover, whatever that wasn't usable, and they kind of start doing, the engineers get in there and they figure out, we got to get this many units in and what's left. And I always think this picture's funny because it looks like they spray painted the grass in there to make it look green, And so the idea of open space is still good, but we like to be more specific about the types of open spaces that you're asking for and to how it's used and it's meaningful. So we'll talk more about that in a second. Next. Streets. We all like to drive around, and as you can just watch people here, they're all driving to and from somewhere. And this image here is a street that people feel comfortable on. That image is not a street that people feel comfortable on. I don't know what happened there. This is not a highway. It's just a road that connects maybe 2 apartment complexes, but it's massively overbuilt. You can imagine you probably get about 10 of those cars across there. Impervious surfaces, so you don't get the natural infiltration or stormwater. Nobody wants to walk there. It's not safe. Cars drive too fast, because even if you have a speed limit sign on there, you'd feel a bit ridiculous driving 30 or 40 when it looks like you're on an interstate. Next. This is another, small details matter. So this is the intersection radius here. So in the image here, you see the man standing. You have a really sort of a tight turning radius there. So the car has to nearly come to a stop before it makes the turn. Whereas in the other image, you can see that the gremlin is actually leaning with centrifugal force as it goes around, not having to touch its brakes. And if that guy were standing on that sidewalk, which happens to not be separated from the street by a planting strip, he would jump out of the way. It would be very uncomfortable. So of course, no one would walk. Next. Yeah, this is not an ad for red pumps, right? This is, somebody did some calculations and said we need some stormwater situation solved, and that was the solution. I think she made it finally, maybe with a little help, but certainly not a lovable place. Next. Buildings and architecture also can inform how a place feels. And so I always say this image says cars live here, right? Because you've got just the garage sticking out in front of the house, and if you look closely, you can see one door, but most of the, I always thought this was an alley at first, but it's actually a street. The image on the other side says people live here. And they said, not come on in, right? There's a fence, a little gate, but it's low, it's not up, so it has a different message or image of the city that it's in. Next. So the way that the towns used to be is they were all interconnected, the streets were, and you can see that around your historic core, right? They were walkable. We know the average person is willing to walk about a quarter mile before they'll get in their car, which is about a 5-minute walk. They were compact. They were, thoughtful about areas they needed to preserve or conserve, and they developed a bit more compactly where they did develop. They tended to be mixed use so that people could go and have their sort of daily needs met without having to get in a car. And they had a diversity of housing types and things, so people at different stages and ages of life and price points and income levels could all live within close proximity. And they were all pulled together so you didn't ever really have to get on the collector. So the top side is the way we used to make towns. The bottom side is how we started doing it after World War II. So that's one of the challenges we face. Next. Next. So the thing is that people's preferences have changed, right? So this, 1980s picture, I think, says, why walk, right? And still, not everybody's dying to walk, and that's, absolutely. Next. Not everybody wants to or wanted to be neighborly. Next. This is an ad for real estate, right? So on the you girls right or left? This one over here says dream big, you know, and it's got all the cul-de-sacs like we just were showing you, and they're bragging about that. And then that's actually an ad for real estate as well. And you see there's not one building shown in there because the preservation and the conservation in that community was as important as anything else they were doing. Next. We see people now wanting to have sort of a more exciting urban life sometimes, and so you'll start to see some, you know, downtown areas like you guys have been discussing, getting people starting to live in them where they hadn't in a while. Next. This is actually a real estate office called the Cool Space Locator, right? And so many places they would go out of business very quickly because there are no cool spaces. So that's different. Next. You know, I have this slide that says changing preferences. However, this was probably taken yesterday, so I don't know that people preferences have fully changed because, you know, everybody wants their Chick-fil-A. But next slide. This is also a dining experience, and people are, you know, starting to come back to these kind of things. Next. This was a grand mall in its day, right? And you think, wow, that's so sad. It shut down. It couldn't have been any worse because it was super full of life and vitality. Next. It actually can get worse when the skylight breaks and all the plants die and all that. And so I remember when I was a kid, where else would you go? You would never go to a downtown. You would go to the mall. It was so super fun. Next. But now people want this again, which is kind of nice for the places that didn't get rid of that. Next. There's a whole idea about there's, you know, housing shortage around the country, right? And there's this concept called missing middle housing. So it's sort of middle scale, mid price point, because most communities have plenty of large single family houses, and sometimes to the chagrin of the community have plenty of apartment complexes, but sort of something in between, all the things in between that you used to have in historic towns are not there. And so here you can see some examples, you know, townhouses and people living above shops and a live-work building and a duplex and a cottage court. And then, believe it or not, that's actually an apartment building at the top there, right? And so when people talk about, you know, we don't want apartments or we don't want multifamily, so often they mean we don't want suburban garden-style apartments with, you know, hundreds of units in the same building stamped out with the parking lots all around it. If you showed them this, they said, well, that may not be where I want to live, but that's great, you know. Next. So the idea of conservation, do we have any of our shirts in the room? Any match? Yeah, we got one of the turquoise shirts, yeah. So I know that that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And so, you know, in so many places we work, the idea of how to conserve is to have larger lots and, you know, kind of the lawn is what's left, right? So there's fewer houses, and, you know, so that's this image on this side. What you see over there is what we call a conservation subdivision, where you've actually have some smaller lots and they're grouped or clustered together, and then what's left over is actual conservation, actual land that is, you know, has a conservation easement on it or something, and so the forest or the field or whatever, the meadow, can stay there. And so you can have the same number of units just done in a different way. And again, some people may say, well, that's not for me. I don't want a smaller house or a smaller lot. And that's okay. The good news is most of what you already have in the city is the larger lot stuff all around, right? So as we talk about conservation, in most places around the world, the idea of conservation of just like not having development isn't even the thing. It's more like where we do develop, let's be really thoughtful about how we do develop. Next. And so this is a good example. I don't know where this is. It could be anywhere, but this is sort of regular. They did save the old tree rows at the farm, the historic farm you can see. And then on the other side, the conservation subdivision, that's Serenbe outside of Atlanta. And so there they made a conscious decision to develop in the form of hamlets and villages. They have true conservation. It's like 60% conservation of the land, and it's mixed use, and you literally never have to leave there unless you want something that's not offered in the community, but they have places to work and restaurants and all that. And it's all connected with trails, and all the streams and the hydrology is preserved, existing trees, et cetera. It's quite magical. Next. So I've kind of said all this while we were talking. Next. You know, this is kind of one of those neighborly moments too. I think this is kind of neat to see where, if you were in that conventional subdivision with a large lot off, with your next door neighbors, an acre away or whatever, you probably don't have much of this kind of thing happening, right? And some people like this and some people don't. Next. We see working has changed. People telecommuting. I always say this guy's running a multi-billion-dollar company off his front porch under his little snuggy blanket there, having wine and potato chips with his dog at, hopefully it's at least afternoon. And then, the types of places that people want to work, spaces like this that are collaborative and exciting. Next. We see a lot of people talking about community agriculture as well as part of a conservation mindedness. Next. Trails, gardens, and public art. How do you incorporate those? Can they be a part of development? Next. Sustainable stormwater, right? So we've got that stormwater. You remember the lady in the red pumps? All of the things, these beautiful things you're seeing in these images are all getting at solving the same problem that crazy inlet was solving that she was trying to step over, right? And so how can stormwater become a part of the place, a part of the experience, and add the functionality, but also the character? Next. People talk about tree saves and, how do you save a tree? And these are just some examples of some communities that have really taken that to the next level of seriousness. Dark skies, how do we protect our stars? We just do that with lighting fixtures that are, don't let the light pollution go up. Next. And this is actually a new community. Well, it's from 1988, so it's not that new anymore, but mind you, it's actually more remarkable that it's from 1988. Because in 1988, it was a particularly bad vintage for development, right? You wouldn't know, if I hadn't told you, that this isn't some historic little village probably. And you see in this image all types of housing mixed in. There's townhouses, there are single-family houses with little mother-in-law suite over the garage that they can rent out or let the mother-in-law stay in. There's single-family houses on their own lot. There's a really large house. There's a community event space with artist studios in the old barn. And the ponds and things are part of the stormwater system. And so you can do things that are really, kind of unique through development. Next. So here's what we've heard so far in our interactions. We've heard people say the things they like most about Gallatin, the lakefront, historical sites, the rural and agricultural lands, the downtown and historical square and courthouse, parks and playgrounds, small town atmosphere, the lower cost of living compared to surrounding areas, the size of the population, and then that you're able to support new development. Next. Some of the challenges, we heard about traffic, that growth is outpacing the infrastructure, the lack of housing variety, and then higher housing costs. And then some of the goals people said it should be better organized. The zoning ordinance should be better organized, be user-friendly, be more graphical so it's easier to understand, have architectural standards that are better, create a good character, remove contradictory elements. If you've studied it all, there's a few things that have kind of gotten added on to over the years. Updating the definitions, protecting farmland and trees, removing the need for variances, having a revised and efficient process for rezoning or zoning, take a development through, sidewalks and streetscape, and then provide for a variety of housing options. That gets back to that missing middle that I was talking about. Next. So to update it, I'm going to start going faster. So the way that we think about it is we're trying to protect the most beloved parts of the city. We want to enhance the areas that need improvement, create more predictable outcomes for developers, but also for the community, so you don't have to worry each time a development comes through what's going to be the result. Have something for everyone. And you notice a few times during this discussion I've said the idea that it may not be for you, but somebody else might like it, or you might like it at a different time in your life. And so as you think about what your preferences are, also think about what your kids' preferences might be, or your parents or grandkids, or however it works out. Want to balance modes of transportation so you don't have to get in your car for everything, and enhancing economic viability of the area, again, making it easier to use and administer, and preserving land as we go. Next. So the way that we try to embed the idea of character, you've heard me say that word a lot, is that we go and we actually document and measure the existing condition. And so these are actually different measurements that we've taken around town. This is a sort of a typical block. And we go out and we measure and study it so we understand what about this area, what are the metrics of that. Next. And then we start putting it into a table, and then these are all your existing zoning districts. And then we start thinking about, well, which of those districts are actually somewhat similar? Which can be combined and start to consolidate so you don't have such a patchwork of things? And then also when you're thinking about character, and I'm going to explain more about the different character districts, how do you translate into different characters, these existing zones? So character, as we typically see it, this is a framework. So you start with natural areas, moving your way in to a rural area. We start seeing farms and whatnot. Then the third character district will be what we call suburban, with a hyphen, not suburban, but suburban. And there it's like larger single-family houses on lots set back further from the street. Then the fourth is what we would call general urban. So you start to see some a little bit of mix of uses, like in a corner store or those types of things. Maybe some townhouses, some smaller single-family houses that are a bit closer to the street. And then into the fifth, which would be more akin to a downtown area. And then some areas that don't fit neatly into any of these things that we call special districts. Next. I mentioned before that uses are the way we used to separate things, and we don't do that anymore, but we still think about uses, right? So this would be a typical use table that you would get in one of our zoning ordinances. And it lays out, what you can do in which different zones. So don't worry, those of you who are really understand and love the idea of separating by uses, there's still a bit of that. It just goes from the most important thing to like the sixth most important thing. Next. We'll start looking at what we call the frontage type, which is how the building meets the street. And we have standards to go along with that. Next. So those are frontages, so porches and shop fronts and stoops. Next. We talked looking at building types. So we say, what different building types mean. Next. Next. There we go. So we'll start to explain that. Next. I mentioned earlier the idea of different types of open space. We call it civic spaces. And so we have a whole section that lays out the squares, plazas, pocket parks, playgrounds. And so when we don't just say open space, it has to be some of these different types. Next. We'll look at signage standards. That'll be appropriate for the community. Next. And so kind of the result of it is this is a two-page spread from one of our zoning ordinances. So you can see it's a bit graphical, as we talked about. It's very easy to understand. There's some examples of this particular character district in this community we were working in. And then there's standards that go along with that. And so this community was more urban than you all are. But, just you get the idea that if you've ever looked at a zoning ordinance, they don't normally look like this, right? It's not something you'd want to look at. Next. So the character districts, we talked about a little bit. Next. So this is nature, right? And so we have a zone that's actually a natural zone where you do your conservation or preservation. Next. This is what we would call rural. Next. This would be the suburban, and I call this more traditional, right? So this is this is new development, but it looks more like a traditional historic neighborhood. Next. This is what you'd have, so we'll still have your current, so your R zones, so your R40, R20, R15, so those will continue on. So if anybody is in these zones, never fear. We're not trying to mess around with them. Next. And then that fourth I mentioned, so there's some commercial space in this example, and then some people live above some of these shops, and you could also have townhouses or single-family houses across the street or next to them. Next. And then here's your CD5, your Character District 5, your urban center. Next. And then I've said the special districts, so like your industrial areas and those sorts of things that, you kind of want them to continue to be as they are, function as they do. So, next. So what we want to do is make sure that even though we get to work all over the country, we're not bringing something alien into you, right? So we have to make a code that works for Gallatin. So it works for the policymakers, your elected and appointed officials. Next. Something that works for the community, for the citizens, that works for the businesses for sure. People of all ages and stages of life. Works for visitors. And the developers, even though sometimes, as we've seen in a lot of these slides, we're not getting the things that get us excited from developers, but we can get them. Next. And most importantly, it has to have the essence of Gallatin, and that's what we really hope you guys will stay involved and help us make sure we're capturing that, because as I said earlier, you know it better than anybody. Next. So the public input process, here's where we are so far at the Planapalooza. We had our kickoff and our sort of preparation to get to this point, and then we'll have the rest of the timeline here. We'll start to draft the ordinance. We'll send it to staff. They'll review it real quick and make sure that we haven't goofed anything up or done anything weird. We'll make any revisions they ask of us, and then we will put it out for you all, and you'll have a public review period. We'll do an open house at that point to give you a bit of an orientation, and then you'll have a month or so to, spend as much time or as little as time as you want with it to give your comments. And so those comments will go to staff. Then they'll synthesize all those, give us edits to make, and then we'll create the final ordinance. Next. So as we said, we had the kickoff. If anybody missed that, this was some of the marketing from that. Next. It was pretty well attended too, so it was really good. Next. We have the website, so if you miss anything, you can actually go and find all this online, and there are opportunities online for you to give input. So it's not like if you can't attend one of the sessions in the next few days, you've lost your chance. So zocogallatin.com. Next. So the Planapalooza schedule, next slide. So here we are at the top right now. Then tomorrow, we'll have a topical meeting about housing and neighborhood character from 1:30 to 2:30. Then there's another meeting about public frontages and streetscapes from 4:30 to 5:30. There's a session on Sunday from 4 to 5 about parks and open spaces. And then on Monday, we have our what we call the work in progress presentation, where we're going to actually show you all the stuff that we've been doing over the next few days. We'll have a presentation, but we'll be doing drawings and have great images for you to look at, so that you can start to see, you can have something tangible to respond to. If we say, oh well, we're thinking about this height of building in this character district, and you can see what that looks like and say, oh, that makes sense to me. Next. And then also, really important thing, we have the open studio hour. So we're actually, once we break down after we're done tonight, we're going to be setting up our office in here. And so anytime, if you have to miss one of these meetings or a presentation, you can just drop in at your convenience. We're going to be open from 9 to 7 on Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday from 9 to noon. We shut it down at noon so we can get ready for the presentation. But you can just drop in and just chat with somebody, or if you have to leave tonight and you don't have time to do the mapping exercise we're going to do, that'll be available. Or if you know somebody who wasn't able to come tonight, you can tell them to participate there. Next. So that's what that's going to look like. Next. Okay, so here's the workshop. So this is what we're going to do. It's going to be fun. So we're going to have you all be planners for the next little bit here. And you may have done some similar things during the comprehensive plan effort. So now you want to sort of adjust your thinking from comprehensive plan and big picture vision to zoning, right? So some of the more specific things. So you're going to have different dots on the table. You're going to put blue dots for areas where you see opportunity, red dots for things that need improvement, and green dots for places that you love. And then you'll have markers as well. And so whenever you put a dot there, you want to make a note as to why you were thinking about, why you put that dot there. And then the other thing that's helpful is if the green, the places you love, think about it in terms of the character of that place, right? Not just like, oh, I love this park or this forest or whatever, but like some of the built places that you like would be really helpful for us. And if it has a name, like it's a subdivision has a name, or a downtown area has a name, note that so we can go and we can look for those places that you really like. And then you'll have, well, next slide. Oh, yeah. And then there's instructions on the table too, so you don't have to remember all this. And then you'll come up with some, 3 or 4 or 5 big ideas. And then at the end of about 25, 30 minutes of you all brainstorming together, and you're going to break up into these tables. Each table is going to present what you've come up with to the other table. And then we'll have a big Q&A session, and I'll take a few questions right now. Let's say like 4 questions for anybody who has to leave, and then we'll come back around at the end, and I'll sit here and talk to you as long as you want to. Yes? Oh, hold on. They want you to have a microphone. Sorry. We're being very official and transparent. So.
I can talk really loud. I have 7 kids.
Wow.
Hello.
There we
Hi.
go. Perfect.
I was at the kickoff a few weeks ago, and of course, thoroughly reviewed your website afterward. I was
Good.
wearing one of those Preserve Gallatin shirts, and noticed, I believe it's in your mission statement, that TPUDC has the sensibilities of a developer, which is, of course, quite concerning
Oh,
to community members, because why wouldn't you have the sensibilities of residents and community members as opposed to developers? Can you explain what you mean by that?
yeah, absolutely. So I think I mentioned this in the last presentation a few weeks ago, that maybe half of our clients are developers and the other half are cities. So we get to work in both camps, right? It's a really good thing because there's a challenge for a lot of consultants who work for municipalities is that they don't do any work for developers. And so the only thing that they know how to take into consideration is simply just public input or staff input or whatever. So when it comes to the development community that we count on to build places, right? It's sort of like, whatever, take it or leave it. And so it starts to create a rub and a disconnect. Well, the thing about it is developers going to develop, right? How they develop is the question, right? And so these examples that I'm showing you are the way that in our planning practice for developers, this is the way that we approach things, right? And so a lot of times developers would ask a similar question to us with the same level of concern, right? Well, if you represent communities and cities and, like one of the things that we're known for, why we get hired by a lot of cities is as we go through this process, you wouldn't believe the number of times where I had somebody who was like vehemently against just even doing this, right? Even a process or whatever, or were in tears because they were so upset. And at the end of it, they will come up to me and they'll say, and I literally a quote, "You listened, you really listened, thank you," And so for me, we have a foot in both camps, but honestly, the best answer to your question is, and why it says it that way, is because when we created our web page, we were doing mostly work for developers, right? And so I can't remember, there's a second part of that, developers, that sort of adds on to it, that kind of softens a little bit, but it's a fair point, and I think, Anna, we need to note that on the web page, because it's, yeah. Yeah. Oh, gosh. In here? Perfect. I would be happy to have you mark it up. And the thing that's crazy is I'm super paranoid about it because I'm a bad speller, and we've developed this over years, but I've spell checked this, we've spell checked all this stuff so many times. Oh, you wouldn't catch it. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. I'm not kidding. I'm happy for that. All right. I have a thick skin. Karen. Oh, good. Nice to meet you, Karen. It's our first Karen of the night. Thank you. So, who else? Anybody else have another question? Okay, perfect. So as we go through, and by the way, this is my favorite part of all this, right? I mean, you may think, oh, he just likes to talk, and that's hard for me to get through because the interaction and the back and forth is the thing. Because especially, and maybe you got a sense of this at the other presentation, but when I see people come in with color-coordinated shirts, I know that there's a concern in the community about something, right? And so I want to understand what it is, what the concern, what the fear is, where it came from, and all of that, and to figure out, like, okay, is there a solution through this process that can help alleviate that concern? And so for me, that's as exciting as anything we're going to do this week. So, yes. Oh, microphone. It's coming. It's coming. There we go.
So the exercise that we're going to do, it said that we put a dot if something needs improvement or something that we love, but I kind of am wondering, like, how is that any of my business to say that somebody else's neighborhood needs improvement because I don't live there? And I'm kind of like, how dare somebody say that my property is a place for improvement when I like it? So that kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to do that exercise because that's what I think.
Sure. That's a fair enough thing to say. It's very rare to hear, by the way. It's very rare to hear somebody have that perspective. What we find is most people are more than happy to tell somebody else what they want them to do with their land. So it's okay, and that's why we word it room for improvement, as opposed to, the first one said places you love. The other option was places you hate, but that's too much, right? So when, it could be, City Hall parking lot. It could be an intersection of the, whatever. It doesn't have to be like, oh, my neighbor does a bad job cutting their grass, so I put a dot on their lawn, in their yard or whatever. So, and no one's ever actually come back and gotten their feelings hurt in all this, nearly 20 years we've been doing this all over the country. I've never had anybody go, I can't believe you put a dot on my property or whatever. So it's okay if you aren't comfortable with that colored dot, but at least put the green ones down, as long as other people at your table are okay with putting the other colors. We need both, though. The comp plan does it to some extent already, right? So it's not like some places we go, you don't have a new comp plan in place. But as we heard in the last presentation, there's some discussion about what the comp plan says in certain areas, and so we want to understand that as we go as well. So. Okay, so, and we'll also, I and my team members will be kind of floating around at your tables too. So if you get stuck on something or you're like, I don't understand or whatever, but it's not super scientific. It's not intended to be stressful. It's intended to just get you talking, get the ideas out on there. That's why we have Crayola markers, so you can tap into your inner child, right? So, so if you have a number, do you have numbers on tags, or just how are we going to do it? Okay. So. Yeah, I was just going to say, we've got, how many people here? 25 or so? Okay, so let's do 5 people per table. It's okay if you have 6 or whatever. And try to not, like, if you know somebody here, like, maybe go to a different table. So we can have a mix of ideas, so not like one map shows all the same ideas. So, yes. Okay, perfect, yeah. Okay, here we go. Now go, all right. So you have to leave too, right? Yes. Okay. So we'll start with you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1. What? Yes, that's what I was doing. Oh, 5. Well, then you're sitting next to the person you came with, right? So. Yes, that was the goal. Right, that's what I was doing like that. Okay, so we've got. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have 3 groups, maybe. Okay, so there's a group and there's a group. How about that? All right, so we'll have 2. Yeah. That's what I was hoping. Absolutely. Right. Right. Yes. Okay. Perfect. So look for people you don't know. Right. Okay. All right, so let's just pick, what are we doing? What? Usually there's somebody from staff like at a table, kind of helping facilitate. All right, so you're gonna go to a table? Y'all gonna go to a table? Yeah. I'm gonna wait.
Yeah. Check.